All right, I think we have time to start. Again, thank you for joining us for our webinar today. My name is Karen Chen. I'm the product manager of QuestionPro Workforce, which is QuestionPro's employee feedback tool. I'll be moderating this webinar today. As many of you have probably noticed, this time we're actually using our webcams. So you can see on the left, that's Charlie here, then there's Jamie on the middle between us. I'll be actually clicking off once I finish my introduction. I'll come back again during the Q&A session. But as I was explaining, today we have with us Charlie on the left, Charlie Judy and Jamie Notter from WorkXO. WorkXO is a leading workplace culture advisory firm that has pioneered groundbreaking concepts like the workforce genome and the millennial alignment scan. Between the two, Charlie and Jamie here have over 40 years of diverse HR experience. Jamie has written several award-winning books, such as When Millennials Take Over, while Charlie has been an HR executive at several Fortune 500 firms. Between the two, I think we are very confident they can give you a very full and varied view on the topic of performance management. And just before we go further, just like to remind our audience that we are taking questions, which you can input in the GoToWebinar machine. Or you can also tweet us on Twitter with the hashtags QuestionPro, WorkXO, Performance Review. This webinar will be recorded, and you'll be receiving a link with a summary and recording at the end of the webinar. And with no further ado, I'm going to let our speakers take it away.
All right, Karen, thanks so much. And good day, everybody. Really appreciate your being here. Thanks, QuestionPro, for hosting this and getting people signed up for it. Hopefully, you're also following along a little bit in the social media sphere, and I kind of jumped through the last slide. But for those of you that want to tweet out stuff while we're talking, feel free. Performance reviews is the hashtag. You can use your own hashtags, of course, as well, but good way to share the content from today. I know that there's lots of ways to set this up, and I think everybody's here for their own reasons when it comes to performance management. We all have our fair share of, let's face it, challenging experiences with them. And that's a little bit what today's about. I mean, I think we're going to poke some holes in those challenges. We're going to talk about what might be, which I think is really the value of any conversation. We don't purport to have the answers, and there are I think some good tidbits we can leave you with, but you got to figure out what makes sense for you guys. And so let's just kind of tee this up. Jamie, kind of set the stage for what we know about the realm of performance management and how the world kind of has grown to love and or hate it.
Yeah, so well, and I'm going to put out there right now, I think it's mostly a hate relationship than a love-hate one. I mean, I know that everyone does it, but when I wanted to tee this up, the first thing I did was look for a source to give me some statistics like these, because this is anecdotally what I hear, and like this, there's some data behind this when they talk to people. I mean, the first statistic is from SHRM, that 90% are painful and ineffective performance reviews, right? Some of them actually decrease performance. Employees hate it, and managers think it's a waste of time. Like this. And again, I've been feeling this for a long time. We wrote about this in Humanize, actually. This is one of those examples where we're kind of succeeding in spite of our management practices rather than because of them. And so I've always been pointing towards performance reviews and performance management as an area where we need to sort of wake up and at least stop doing what we've been doing. I agree with you that it's not an easy answer to sort of solve the actual problems of improving performance and figuring out how to compensate people. Like, these are real challenges we have to figure out, but I'm really clear that the way we're doing it now is not working, and we have to be, I think, faster at abandoning that.
I mean, I love the fact that there's actually the adjective of painful attached to this. Like, I mean, I don't know how many other aspects of the employment experience are associated with pain, but this is clearly one of them.
Yeah, no, this and staff meetings are the two that I point to the most that say, you know what, why we keep doing it like this.
Meetings would be on the same list. And performance management, we know, is laden with meetings as well. I can recount countless hours in a meeting room talking about performance. So one of my observations after having spent close to 25 years in the realm of HR and as an HR leader is that we collectively tend to hide behind whatever is easy and or keeps us from having to do the hard stuff. And I think performance management systems broadly in general, and we talk about systems, it can be a technology, it can be a timeline or a process or a set of forms, but we use those aids to help us get through what is a challenging process. And the real meaning in any performance management process is ostensibly the feedback that comes from it and the results that come from that feedback, which again should lead to some sort of evolution for our people. What happens is I think we get so caught up in the system and the process and the timeline, the forms, what needs to be done, that we lose that focus on what this is really all about to begin with. And people who are really good at going through those steps are also the ones that are really bad at giving feedback and or receiving it. It's much easier to check a few boxes than it is to have a meaningful conversation with somebody. It's much easier to fill in a few blanks than it is to sit down and have a good old-fashioned human conversation with somebody. And so I think a lot of what we'll talk about today or point to is really about the system. We're going to try to break that down into kind of three things. The first is kind of the construct, so like the system itself and how it's comprised, how it's organized, you know, what really is kind of the nuts and bolts of it. The content is so what is this really all about? What are we measuring? And is it really, does it really reflect who we are or who we need to be? And then the results is like, so what's all this for? What are we trying to accomplish? And is it leading to ultimately what's going to drive value in our organization? We'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we know come up again and again. Jamie's pointed to one of them already, compensation. Like for a lot of people, performance management is all about compensation. We'll talk about, I think, why it doesn't need to be. So this is how we'll kind of go through it. Jamie, before we start jumping into some of these things, anything that you want to add to kind of set the stage?
No, I think we're heading in the right direction, because I think part, sort of building off what you said, I think part of what is missing in all this is because it's been so process focused, we really haven't gotten clear about why we're doing them to begin with and what we're trying to accomplish with them. It's sort of like form follows function, you know, and we're not really getting clear on the function piece. We're just sort of obsessed with the form. And if we got clear on the function stuff, which was what we'll talk about, I think then you'll start to see, we'll start to evolve the processes in ways that make more sense.
Good. So before we get started, I'm just going to, you all identify with these brands. These are large, successful, prominent organizations, and several of them are historically kind of on the leading edge of creating workplaces in which people can thrive. Not to say either one of these doesn't have their own challenges, but these organizations have all explicitly said they are ditching performance reviews, or at least the annual appraisal process. Like, done. And many of them, for the reasons that we started to tee up, and they all have kind of their own story, and they all have kind of their own response. But if organizations of this magnitude are starting to say things like, we don't need to do that anymore, and these are the organizations that are more likely to be traditional, risk-averse, need to check boxes, compliance, regulatory, et cetera, just because of, again, their size and or the way that they're traded publicly, et cetera. If they're saying they don't have to do it, then I think we all got to be talking about what the heck's going on. So I thought we should just kind of start with that. And we're not suggesting in any way that you need to be ditching your performance management process, but I think it's important to know that to some extent that's where the curve is going. So let's talk about the construct and how we might even just start to humanize it a little bit, or allow for really more of a humanized approach to what we do. So let's have a little what-if discussion. And Jamie, I'd love for you to kind of jump in on any of these things. So as we teed it up, what if we just ditched annual appraisals altogether? Like, forget about this age-old process of 2 months of every year sinking our time and effort into getting all this stuff done and coming up with a rating and then going through this, review process and approval process and so on and so forth and everything that comes with it. I think I saw something the other day that managers estimate that they spend 200 hours a year just on the kind of getting ready for and completing the annual appraisal process.
And by the way, I think that's one of the main reasons why those big companies were ditching it. Like, they did the math. You multiply 200 times the number of managers times the salaries they're paying. Like, that's an obscene amount of money. And so they're like, unless we're seeing a return on this investment, why would we do it? So it's a
right. And it's obviously much harder to get that other side of the equation, but the cost number is astounding. So if we were to do that and just like blow up the cycle for a second, like what if we stop talking about timelines and deadlines? It's not that it necessarily has to happen by this date, or it's not that it necessarily has to happen with this kind of frequency. Again, kind of what if? What does that mean to you and your organization? And your tendency is going to be to come up with ideas or reasons why it won't work. We'd like you to think about how it could work, and these are the kinds of discussions that you can have with your people around your own tables. What if
I think this is a big piece. I don't know if we're going to talk about this later, but this is a big piece where we're not using technology the way we should be. Like, it's so easy to get sort of have sources of ongoing feedback and knowledge about performance that is captured online, that is captured through text messaging stuff, that is captured in other ways than these forms that we have or these meetings that we have to go through. This is a perfect place, I think, to start using algorithms more than like actually having this, automatically searched and collated as opposed to us doing it manually. And I think we're starting to see those technologies develop, but we're, I think, too slow in kind of implementing them.
Yeah, and those I think there are a lot of those technologies, and but as you said, there are also ways to do it with what we already have at our fingertips. And so I think, depending on where you are in your organization, you can think about what makes sense for you. I think particularly in this world of social media, and the communication technique that is 140 characters or less. Let's stop thinking about forms. Let's get the bullet points and sound bites and collecting feedback from multiple sources. The age-old, everybody's got a counselor or a mentor, and that person is responsible for the feedback for that person. Like, that doesn't even make sense in the way that we are networked and the way that we build our workplace communities. And so, how are we looking for little pieces of feedback along the way that we can gather and share from any source, outside or inside? Jamie, you got any thoughts on that?
No, well, I agree, and I think maybe this could be jumping ahead, but part of why we don't do that is because so much, this goes back to the purpose of these things. So much of this is about, like, we have to do it every year because I need something to document in case I need to fire somebody. Like that kind of stuff. Like, if you need a system to document bad performance, then let's create a system to do that. But don't combine that with a performance management system, which is ostensibly about increasing the performance of the organization or developing our people. I mean, like, we tend to try and sort of kill too many birds with one stone on this, and I think that's what has sunk this as well. That's why the annual appraisal thing, it's like we have to tick that box every year because we need to be covered, as opposed to a more organic, let's see where the learning's happening and what kind of efforts we need to do to help our people grow. Like, that shouldn't follow a schedule like that. That should be based on what's going on.
Yeah, I love that, and the kill too many birds. I mean, the performance management system has become the catch-all
Hmm.
for all things HR compliance. You're absolutely right. Like that is the way that we document our path to removing someone from the organization, and there are so many other ways to do that. If you need a system like performance management to justify the fact that somebody needs to be removed from the organization, then you've got other issues that we're not going to talk about on this call to begin with, right? So that's just something we got to talk. Okay, we just kind of get that out of the way.
Yeah.
Have coffee, go to lunch, go to breakfast, meet down the hall. It doesn't have to be a staged, like we're going to have this meeting, it's going to be an hour long, and we're going to get through it. And that's the painful part about it, right? It just feels so mechanical and staged when you can get feedback in every conversation that you're having with any person along the way, particularly if you ask for it. And I think that's where some of this whole idea about balancing, it doesn't, you don't need a okay, must be done by to go get some information about how you're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there needs to be a good balance between you yourself taking responsibility for your own performance and the feedback that you're going to get, going out and getting it from whoever you need to get it from, irrespective of who's assigned to or responsible for giving it to you. And then there's got to be some modicum, at least, of accountability. Like, yeah, we got to do this stuff. It's important, but I don't know that we necessarily need the system to do that.
Yeah. Now, one of the companies we studied in When Millennials Take Over, Menlo Innovations in Ann Arbor, like they're only 50 people, but their performance management system is when you want feedback, you buy your peers lunch.
Love it.
And you get in the conference room and you get feedback. And back to even the accountability piece, they also make the point, if you really want your salary to go up, if you want your pay band to be increased, then you'd better invite your harshest critics to that meeting. If you don't do that, then obviously you don't want to sort of move ahead, like that's how we're going to run things. Like
because those harshest critics have they have this is a question, Jamie. They have the insights on what might be keeping you from reaching that next level. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, and this is a system that really understands what drives their success, and they're very collaborative. And so, I literally saw this happen in a meeting where the harshest critic of this guy was like, look, you can't be off to the side working on that project by yourself, because then I can't see where we're going to move 6 chess moves down the board. I need to see that. That's why we need that. So the feedback was not just like, you're good, you're bad, you're a 3.8, you're a 4.2. The feedback is, when you engage in this behavior, we don't succeed as a team, so we need to fix that. That's performance increasing, right? So that's performance management.
And that's connecting. One of the things that you brought out there was it was connecting the feedback to success. Like, in order for us to do this, which we've all agreed is important, we need to do that, and you're not doing that, right? So that's an important part of the conversation. You also mentioned the ratings and the scores. I think that this is one of the biggest obstacles to meaningful performance management, is that we get so up on a scale, a grade, a number, a letter, a meets expectations versus exceeds expectations, and what we end up doing is splitting hairs around something which at the end of the day doesn't give any feedback to somebody. It really just gives them a label, and what we do is lose the feedback in the process. So I think we got to be really careful about that. There is some pretty strong and convincing evidence these days, scientific evidence based on some pretty good studies, one of them by the Journal of Applied Psychology, that even the system of assigning a rating is inherently biased, and it's biased based on the person that's responsible for assigning the rating. What they found in this particular study was that 62% of ultimately what rating was assigned was based on the rater's perception, not actually on the individual's performance. That's a huge disconnect, which ultimately it means is doomed to fail if in fact the end game is providing a rating.
Yeah, this is one of my biggest criticisms of these programs, is that they're ultimately not about learning, right? And this is sort of an example. Like we want that answer, right? Like old school, grade school, what's the right answer stuff. And in our systems, like these are human beings we're dealing with. This stuff is more complex. You want to actually figure out who needs to increase their performance and in what ways. Then you can't force it into that kind of structure because it actually pulls you away from the learning piece. Right? It narrows us down, right, as opposed to opening us up, which is what I think we need to be doing.
Yeah, and the other thing that kind of is inherently warped about this is that it essentially means that we can put everybody into a bucket, and I don't know. I think people are getting tired of being put in the buckets. And there's very little, certainly motivational, that can come from being in one of those buckets. Quite frankly, whether you're in the top bucket or the lower bucket, again, it sends mixed messages depending on who you are. So I think there's increasingly a lot of challenge with and interest around understanding the kind of value that having a rating provides. Now, many of you are saying, yeah, but then how do we get to compensation without a rating? Because we don't know how to pay somebody if we don't know really where they rank. Well, we'll talk about that in a second, and not that, again, we have all the answers, but it's something for us to think about. Let's talk about the content piece of this, which is, okay, so what are we kind of measuring? What's important to us? And then how does that relate to or tie to both the organization and the individual? And one of the things that I think Jamie and I would talk about first and foremost when it comes to any process, any HR or people process in any organization, is kind of the cultural component to this. If we don't first understand kind of who we are and how we work, what we truly value or what's truly valued in our organization, and ultimately what drives our success, then chances are we are not measuring the right things. We are not providing feedback on the right things. And so having a deeper clarity around, again, who we are and how we work, and some of the distinct areas of one's culture can drive how we go about evaluating one another. There's also potentially a disconnect between who we say we are culturally and how we talk about that either from an external brand perspective or how we talk about it with values on the wall and the plaques that we have on our desks, with how we actually conduct ourselves in the performance management process. A classic example is we say all the time we're a transparent and open door policy kind of firm or organization, yet we'll have a performance management system that's guarded and closed and anonymous. So
right.
Like those two things don't really fit together. And that's just an example. Obviously there's many of them, but this is a construct. What you have in front of you is a construct, a very basic top-line construct of how we think about culture at Work At. So we're not going to spend a lot of time thinking about it, but the news for those of you on this call is that there are ways to understand your culture. There is a way to get to some of that deeper appreciation so that you can make sure it actually is then reflected in your performance management process. Jamie?
And I was just going to say that the challenge around the performance management stuff is like even if you get clear on what your culture is, which I agree is something you need to do, you still also have to drill down to the level of behaviors in being able to measure this stuff, and not even, well, I mean, you can use, I mean, whether you use a ratings scale or not, you have to be able to say, what does it look like transparency, like what does transparency look like at a rank and file level? And you got to describe that so they can see. It's kind of like, I got interviewed yesterday about dress codes and should we have more relaxed dress codes. And one of the points I made is like, okay, if you're going to have a dress code, at least have photos of what right? Don't just say, well, you must be business casual or professional or it should be appropriate. Like we use all this language, it's not clear. Here's a picture of what too much cleavage looks like. Like I want to, like, well, okay, I don't want to see that, but like no, you have to show. Yeah, we have to show people. Be really clear. The same is true with performance management. If you want to be transparent, talk about you routinely share information across silo lines. right? Like whatever it is, you got to say this is what you do when you're doing this right. Or if you are sort of saying, you know what, I'm only going to share that on a need to know basis. If that that's an example of doing it wrong. Like I did this with a client where we mapped it out for all of their cultural principles. Here's what it looks like when you're doing it right. Here's what it looks like when you're doing it wrong. Because when you get clear on that, actually, part of the cool part is some people will see that and say, all right, I want out. Like, I don't want to be a part of this organization, not because it's bad. It's just like I'm not good at those behaviors, so I'm not going to succeed. And so this particular client actually coached someone out, sent them on to conferences so they could go network and find a new job. Like, that's the value of doing this, but you have to drill it down past the you know the terms like that we have in our genome. These are important, but if you're not getting down to that building block level, you're not going to be able to give sort of actionable feedback.
Yeah, and that's thanks for making that point, Jamie. It's really an important one. I mean, for those of you that are more familiar with the construct of a competency framework, or attributes that we're measuring, typically those things are accompanied by a 1 or 2 line definition. This is what it means. But it's really hard, as Jamie describes, to then apply that to your own personal situation. So how would this show up in what I do every day? Creating context and as you said, behaviors, or what does that look like and feel like, is really, really important. And that's a little bit of this customization piece, which, I mean, let's face it, there is very little left in this world that can't be customized. I mean, this is a picture of an actual Converse tennis shoe that was.
Why'd you get a picture of my shoe? That's amazing.
Isn't it? In fact, I've got that shoe. It's in my closet. But this is somebody who said, this is what I want my shoe to look like, right? And we all know this. I mean, it's everything in the digital age, particularly, is a customized experience. Why can't we do that when it comes to employment processes, people processes like performance management? Have we taken even a moment to sit down with the people who we're charged with giving feedback to and saying to them, so how would you like this to go? Like, what would it look like to you? What does meaningful feedback sound like? Do you want to go grab a coffee, or does that make you feel uncomfortable? Would you rather just get an email from me? You want to do this weekly? But we don't do that. What we do is we put everybody into the one-size-fits-all process that we've designed for the entire organization, and the fact of the matter is that's not how people receive stuff. So, not to mention that's how people today are increasingly looking for that customization. So if we can't offer it, we're turning them off to begin with. Let's figure out a way to get down to what the individual really needs. And by the way, if you're the one who's responsible for giving the feedback, you can have your own needs too. You can have your own expectations. You don't have to kowtow to everything that they ask for, but it can be at least a two-way conversation.
No, I agree completely. And this is, as you said, this is sort of the reality of the digital age, is the customization. And I think part of where we fall down on that, or where we don't think to do that, is because I still feel like managers, using the term broadly, don't really own this performance management sort of role. That's what HR makes me do. You know what I mean? Like, oh, HR does this. Like, no, I think there's a huge piece to managing that is about supporting the development and growth of the entire system. And so, of course, you would be getting feedback, and of course, you would customize it, just like you would try and customize something for that customer that you're selling something to, because that's what they expect. But for some reason, we turn that switch off as managers. I feel like we just basically make managers try and do too much. They're trying to do content work and delivery over here, and then also manage on the side. And I think we should actually sort of take that management role more seriously. If we did, I think we would more naturally jump to customizing.
Yeah, and that goes back to something we said about this whole idea of crowdsourcing and our open sourcing, multi-sourcing feedback. That one person who is technically in the system, your supervisor, may not be naturally good at giving feedback.
Right. And
we know that, right? I mean, that's been proven since the Industrial Revolution. Not everybody is good at giving feedback. So other people should take an active role, outside of that architecture. And because you're right, Jamie, we overwhelm our managers. We ask them to do so much, it is impossible for them to do any of it with any real amount of success. And so this is the thing again and again and again that will quickly fall to the very bottom of the list. And we've got to find people that'll put it towards the top of the list.
This is kind of unrelated, but I'll tell another quick story from one of the organizations that we studied that has these two roles within the company called mentor and professional, and the roles are mostly for making the culture alive. They're people who are really good at that, and it's at any level. So you can be entry level and be one of their 5% that are considered mentors, because you've obviously understood the culture so well. And so I like that idea of Pixel, like go in your organization, don't call it mentor or professional, but look for the people who are really good at giving feedback and let them give that feedback to more people, right? Like if that's like a skill they have, it doesn't matter who they're managing. If like there's someone you go to say, hey, how did I do in that? And they're like, oh yeah, I'm good, and they give you the feedback. Like that's a nice way to do it, I think.
I love that idea, yeah, and there are people who are not only good at it, but who really like it, and that's something that they gravitate to. So, all right, well, so let's and I know we're kind of reaching the tail end of at least our allotted time to talk. I don't know that we have a lot of questions coming in. Feel free to submit them via what are we using on GoToMeeting. And we'll try to get to those. So let's talk about what all this means. Like, so what's the outcome? Are we chasing after the right results? Should we be chasing after something different? Well, let's talk about compensation for just a second. And I debated whether or not we should even have this conversation, but I think it's important for us to do it. And I guess I should caveat it with, there's a lot of sophisticated thinking around compensation these days, and there are a lot of really smart people and/or organizations out there that can help you do it if you need to. And probably many of you on the phone are smarter about compensation than I am. But all of us, or many of us, have been conditioned to think that compensation is a function of one or two things, and one or two things only. And the first is, maybe, and a lot of organizations don't do this, where is that person in regards to the market for that particular role? And then the second is, how are they rated? How did they perform? And hence comes this need to derive a rating so that will go into the system, and then that will drive compensation. I would like us to think about, and I've used this in other organizations, and so I can tell you that it works, that you can still intersect performance or value with market without having to have a conversation around what the rating is, or whether somebody is a 4 or a 4.5. So as an example, and you can use any slice that you want to, but as an example, let's just start with the assumption that everybody in our organization is important to the organization. Like, they all play a role. If they didn't, then we've got, again, other challenges that we should be solving for. So let's start with the idea that everybody is important. Let's also admit the fact that there are some people, for whatever reason, and it could be because of the role that they play, it could be because of the skills that they possess, it could be because what they've been able to contribute again and again and again, it could be because of the role that they're going to play next year or immediately. They are a little bit more important. They are crucial. And then there are some and few who are in fact indispensable, right? I mean, we all know that the cemeteries of the world are filled with irreplaceable people, but there are people who, for the same reasons we just described, may be indispensable to the organization. Don't worry about what, a 4.0 does not mean you're important. All of those things that we described, and you can come up with your own criteria. And I guarantee you, if you get the right people at the table and you have a list of the people that you're talking about, you can get people into these buckets. Yes, you have to do it every now and then. It's not a great thing to do, but it is pragmatic in the business world. You've got to compartmentalize people. You can do that, though, without creating these strict boundaries around what those things mean. This may help you distribute compensation a little bit easier without having to connect it directly to the number. So the value is not the performance, it's not the rating, it may be part of it, but it's not the total thing. You can still look at market, etc. use it, don't use it. But the idea is that you don't necessarily need to have that rating to get to compensation. You can still have a meaningful conversation around how to distribute that compensation. Jamie, you have any observations on this?
Yeah, well, I would add, I think doing it via that rating, and this is the problem I mentioned in the blog post, as soon as people know that rating is connected to the compensation, they game the system. Like it's inevitable. Like that's what you do, and this also goes. I mean, this is maybe my broader sort of comment around connecting compensation performance reviews is the Dan Pink stuff. Like rewarding people with money causes a laser-like focus. Like it does that, and so much of our work, and actually I like this model, like figuring out the difference between important, crucial, indispensable. That's a complex calculation. That's nuanced. That's has a lot of variables in it, and like that kind of complex work, if you sort of say, well, all right, if I can get it to a 4, I'm going to get more raise. Then like it causes people to drop all the other stuff off to the side and focus on what do I do to get a 4.
Yeah,
and that's one of the reasons why the system gets ruined. And it just, I feel like a lot of people use performance reviews for compensation, frankly, because they don't have a system for compensation. They make salaries up, and they don't want to tell people why they give bonuses, so they want to hide that with at least, well, they got a 4, so at least I can justify this bonus. And it just, they need this system.
Thank you. And by the way, for those of you that do connect more closely compensation strictly with performance as defined by last year, the last 12 months. I mean, just think about that for a second. What you're deciding to do is to pay somebody for the next 12 months based on what they just did for the last 12 for the last 12 months. I mean, you're already talking about a tremendous lag there. That's why, I mean, you could have an awful year as measured traditionally by performance and still be crucial to the organization for what lies ahead. There comes your disconnect if you're using last to tell us next. And so there's all sorts of things that are wrong with this. Here's an idea. There's many of them out there, certainly worth thinking about. The last concept that we want to throw out there for you is just around, so what are you doing with this? Like, how are you turning it into something that's measurable, actionable, something that adds value? And, you know, it has a little bit to do with this lag, especially if you're doing something on an annual basis. So you get some feedback on things that you did like 12 months ago, and it's too late to really do anything about that at this point, you know, and/or is it relevant to what I'm trying to do next year? And so there are a lot of concepts out there about goal setting and how we, you know, tie our own performance and our drive to those goals and go out and research them. One that I really like is this OKR approach, which just stands for Objective and Key Results. It came about from a venture capitalist named John Doerr, who's behind the likes of Google and Intuit. And this is a simple, quick, and easy way to have some substance behind your performance management process without a big system, without a big technology, et cetera. Effectively, what it says is, what's your objective? What are you looking to accomplish in the next week, in the next month, in the next year? Some organizations do this on a daily basis. They sit down at the beginning of the day and they say, what is my objective? And then underneath that, they map out very briefly, succinctly, 3 key results that will help me know, help others know that I have met that objective. And so, and those results obviously should be specific and they should be measurable and so on and so forth. But it starts to carve this thing up a little bit. And now we're not talking about performance. We're talking about objectives and results, which is a little bit more, I mean, you can digest that a little bit easier and you can get after it a little bit easier. If you were to have that kind of conversation with the people that you're responsible for, tell me what's your objective this week? How are we going to know that we've met that? Cool. And then you get back to it at the end of the week and you say, how did we do? It gives you something that's a little bit easier to talk through, to point to, et cetera. And then, you know what, it doesn't last forever. You can move on to the next one next week. Jamie, have you had any exposure to this or other ideas about processes?
when you set like the key results and stuff, I mean the direct report actually gets to do some of the defining of that.
Oh
right?
yeah. I mean,
That's
they're clearly responsible for that. Yeah.
that's another one of the things. Like usually it's like, well, my boss told me I had to do this. Like I do believe that we need to have people define their own success metrics in a huge, like, I think that's hugely powerful, and I think we're basically leaving potential on the table by forcing everyone to do cascade down the strategic plan into your specific area and then set random targets for you.
Yeah.
That guarantees disengagement. Okay, but if you actually said, all right, have at it. You deliver pizzas for our company, but so what do you think the success metrics would be? People who come up with that are going to be the ones that actually do well and increases the performance. But I don't know. I think we're very afraid as organizations to give that power to our people, and it bites us in the end.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that none of that is to say, and I know Jamie would endorse this, that we shouldn't all have exposure to and an understanding of and appreciation for what the corporate objectives strategy is. In fact, that's crucial. But to necessarily let that trickle down and translate exactly to what I myself can do and or influence on a daily basis, I think is lofty, quite frankly. So this whole idea of having it be bite-sized, having it be customized, taking ownership for it, removing the clutter and having it be about a conversation. There are simple frameworks for that out there, and I'd encourage you guys to, at the very least, go out and check out this OKR approach. I think it's pretty cool. So I see Karen's face, which means that we have reached the end of our time. Karen, I don't know if we had any questions submitted or if there are other things that you want to talk about, but I'll turn it over to you.
We have a few questions. Given that we're kind of short on time, I'm just going to pick the one that seems most broad and seems to be the one that kind of relates to most of the other questions. Do you see patterns of feedback preferences across and between different demographics and industries? For example, you were talking about earlier how some people prefer a coffee, other people prefer a more systemic and more maybe even email-based system. Do you see a trend in certain industries or certain demographics? Ways that something you can give to our viewers, oh, I'm in this industry, or I'm managing maybe these millennials. How should I best go about it?
Yeah, so I would say I'd see it less in the vertical and the industry. I'd see it less being that way than I would generationally. And I have a few observations about that, but I'm going to turn it over to our resident generational expert, Jamie, talk a little bit about his observations there.
Yeah, well, I think millennials definitely get the rap of being the ones that want constant feedback. Often that's framed negatively because it's we've sort of spoiled them as children, and so they are.
Hey!
I'm just saying what the rap is. I'm not saying it's true. And so we're like, oh, they want constant feedback, but they can't take negative feedback, et cetera, et cetera. It has to all be positive, and I think that's all ridiculous. Actually, I do think the speed of the world that the millennials grew up with means they like the idea of I had to wait 3 months for you to tell me something. Why on earth would I do that? This is a generation that looks around and says, why aren't we sharing more information? So I think generationally, millennials are going to want more data, more feedback, more information, not because they're entitled, but just simply because they grew up with the internet, they grew up with this information, they grew up with speed. And I think the older generations may not look to that. To be honest, though, I think when they get it, they're kind of like, hey, this is better. You know what I mean? So I think we're actually more aligned on that. It's just we didn't have the tools when old folks like me were growing up, right? So we didn't build that into our systems. But as soon as we figure out how to do it, I think everyone's going to be on board with it.
That's well said.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you so much, Jamie and Charlie, for giving us the time and all this really interesting insight. To our viewers, thank you for staying all the way to the end. We will be sending up a follow-up email with the recording and with a summary of the points mentioned. You can see on the screen right now, these are all our personal information. If you have any questions or you want to start a discussion, feel free to reach out through us through email, Twitter, or whatever social media platform you find us. Again, thank you all, and I think we'll sign off now. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks so much. Enjoyed it.